ago so that I could service the industry and dry bean growers throughout the US and Canada in my own way, the way I felt comfortable doing it. I was a buyer with several different bean companies for the better part of 13 years, and I found that being on the payroll kind of restricted you a little bit from what you could do with your growers, and quite often you couldn't reach the full potential that was available. So when I started this 4 years ago, I began traveling Canada, the 4 provinces that produce dry beans, and the US. I started with 6 of the major production states, and basically to look at the production in July and August myself and assess the potential in different areas, quality concerns, and meet with growers in all of these different areas. In those 4 years, I probably learned more about dry bean production than I did being stationed in southern Manitoba, working with a very close-knit group of growers. It's really broadened my horizons. So this past year, 2019, was definitely the most challenging for me, as it was, I think, for almost every dry bean grower throughout Canada and the US. There really wasn't one particular geographical area which did not suffer from some sort of severe weather-related event. We had everything from hail, droughts, excess moisture, snow, pretty much you name it. And unfortunately, a lot of our dry bean crop in North America this past year remained in the field and was unable to be harvested. So those kind of challenges to last year's production have led us to 2020. I know a lot of producers even today are still facing a lot of crop in the field. In North Dakota, there's a huge area which basically was wet all summer. And that ranged anywhere from Grand Forks down to Fargo, as far west as Fessenden and Jamestown. Some producers had a beautiful crop of beans coming along, and the July rains never stopped, and unfortunately they were only able to harvest a couple hundred acres out of maybe 15 or 1,700 acres that they had planted. And for the producers who weren't able to harvest anything, they're in a bit of a disaster zone because they were wet all summer and they received heavy snowfall, and then it melted and it started to freeze again. Then they got another heavy snowfall, almost up to 3 feet on top of their already saturated soil. That snow didn't melt. So with all the crops still in the field and the inability to be able to travel on the land and to harvest what is out there, I think there's probably still close to 3 million acres of corn in the field in North Dakota. And we're not sure when it will actually come off the ground, because that ground will have to dry up before it can be traveled on. Which leads to the challenges of planting the 2020 crop. For a number of US growers in that, what I call a hot spot, they are fairly certain they can't get that land, get the crop off and get the land in shape prior to July 1st. So their options for planting anything this upcoming year are going to be quite limited. It will take nothing short of a miracle to get that land planted. We began with the 2020 year. One of the first events was the US Dry Bean Council attending. They have their winter meeting in Cancun, Mexico. And we started off a little shaky. They were there between February 6th and February 8th. And just so happened they had a frost in Mexico while they were down there. So their winter crop, which is typically harvested now in March, was portions of it were definitely affected by the frost. And Mexico was already coming off of a disastrous 2019 year because they had such dry conditions. They didn't plant, they planted about 50% of the beans that they had intended to plant. So the production issues in Mexico are definitely going to play into the 2020 marketing year. Seeding, finding seed this year, that has been the challenge. With all the production issues in Wyoming and Idaho, where a lot of the U.S. dry bean seed is produced, their challenges were no different than North Dakota and Minnesota, where we commercially produce a lot of dry beans. So they still have seed production fields that are in the field and didn't get harvested. They've also had a number of seed lots come off that weren't suitable for market, and germinations were low, or there was a lack of vigor in the seed. So we've been playing with seed shortages since basically October, November. And there's been a number of classes of beans that have been sold out since then. Basically navy beans, dark red kidneys. We were told there was an abundant supply of pinto seed available at that time, but within weeks it was gone. And I don't think there was that much seed, but I think the interest in planting pinto beans as the market started to rise for the 2019 crop, it grew very quickly. And so finding seed today and making decisions to plant dry beans is a very limited option. There's a couple classes of beans that I think you could still readily find some seed for. That's sometimes a good sign and sometimes a bad sign. The reason there's seed there is because the market has not come to life like some of the other classes of beans have, or the interest in growing it is died off. Black beans is definitely one of them. We've produced a lot of black beans over the years, and last year North Dakota jumped into black beans. They had been faced with $21 navy and pinto bean price for the better part of 2 years for their overage of production. You know, their contract levels were still fairly strong at, you know, $26 to $28 a hundredweight, but the black bean price had held at that mid-20-cent level for a number of years. So North Dakota put in probably an extra 100,000 acres of black beans. But Mother Nature has played into that market significantly, and a number of those black beans, unfortunately, are still in the field. So looking at what to plant this year, finding seed, you could probably find some cranberry seed, you could probably find some black bean seed. You might be able to find a little bit of small red seed or great northerns, but the other classes such as slow darkening pintos, which has become a rather big market here in Canada, that seed is non-existent. If 20 truckloads of vibrant pinto bean seed became available today, I'm pretty sure you could sell it. There's that much interest in growing the pintos, especially with the current spot prices that we've been seeing for good quality 2019 pinto beans. Markets have been, you know, they started off fairly slow, and but very quickly the industry recognized there's going to be a shortage of beans. So they were a little proactive. They raised their dealer prices significantly, and that began long before harvest was over. The grower pricing was slower to come, but as we rolled into the January 2020, the shortage of beans and and the realization that there was not a lot stored on farm, it became a reality. And all the different bean companies, because of such a disastrous year of production and so widespread across North America, it seems every major bean company was in a unique position. Some were going into the 2020 marketing year in a long position, carrying over significant quantities of 2018 and 2017 beans that they owned at very low values. I'm sure those companies did fairly well. But as far as the last 2 months, finding beans on farm has become increasingly challenging. And I myself, over the past 3 years, didn't get a lot of attention from bean companies and dealers that I would visit with every year. But this year, I took a rash of phone calls from a lot of different bean companies looking for my assistance in helping them find beans. So that kind of describes how desperate some people were to try and cover their positions or find their needs to get them through the marketing year. We've got 6 months of marketing ahead of us, and we're going into the 2020 harvest with no inventory. You can read a lot of different information that the USDA and other organizations are going to put out, but in all reality, we don't have inventory. In fact, some of the major bean companies that deal with navies and pintos in the U.S., they no longer have anything to sell. They're sold out. Whatever they have in inventory and were able to buy is already spoken for. And we got 6 months left to go. So I anticipate there'll be some facilities that'll be idle during some of the summer months with nothing to do because there's no beans to clean. But I'm hoping this year, and especially after these last 2 years, because after the harvest of 2018, we had a wet year, we had some snow in Manitoba and North Dakota, and it was just a terrible harvest. I unfortunately made the mistake of telling a number of growers, well, it can't get any worse. Well, I'm not going to say that again, because 2019 has, I don't think anybody's ever seen anything like it. I have a friend in Michigan who's been in the bean business for 52 years, and he's never seen anything like it. And so we're headed into a year where I think acres are going to be limited by the seed availability, which is going to create some unique opportunities for different classes of beans. Canada has been in a bit of a unique position with navy beans and dark red kidney beans because nearly 2 years ago when Europe imposed a 25% tariff on all U.S. origin beans, well, a number of agricultural products, it kind of opened the door for Canadian companies to broaden their margins and to offer some higher values to the growers producing beans here in Canada. That's really specific to navy beans and dark red kidneys, which the majority of that production does make its way over to the UK and other European countries. So is that going to stay in place forever? No. Is it being talked about by the U.S. Dry Bean Council? Definitely. And I think they're working hard at trying to get an equal playing field back to their bean industry. They do have a leader in the United States who is very pro-agriculture, and could he very quickly make a deal with Europe Yeah, it seems almost anything he does pretty quickly, and sometimes they even put thought into it. But they are talking about it. The roadblock there is that Europe, it's not a priority for Europe. This import tariff on agricultural products is not something that they're quite ready to talk about yet. So I do think we're going to have that advantage going into the 2020 marketing year, and it should help keep our prices strong. And we have, you know, we've had the opportunity to develop excellent connections with a number of European companies that previously weren't knocking on the doors of Canadian dealers. So it's a little ironic that the U.S. companies will tell you they're still shipping as much product as ever into Europe, because you'd think there would have been some block against that 25%, but that is what the numbers show, and we will continue to hopefully have that advantage for another year or two. When it does go away, and I think it will at some point, it could have a little bit of a downside effect on some of our specialty beans, and probably especially the navy bean market. So just a show of hands, how many growers in the room are growing dry beans this year? And how many would like to? Well, that's interesting. So why am I here? So I think we're going to see strong pricing of dry beans for this coming year. The industry itself, and it is all driven by the U.S., they are not comfortable unless they've got a substantial amount of supply on hand. I know the state of North Dakota they like to have 1 million bags of Pinto Beans kicking around just in case. So that being said, 2020 could very likely be a year where production and the growing season will dictate a number of things. We know we're going to have relatively strong pricing. Not maybe quite as high as the highs we've seen for good quality beans from last year, but I do feel we're going to see North Dakota Pinto Beans. The insurance came out a few days ago, and their insurance coverage is at a $28 level. It hasn't been that for quite a while, and that's pretty much exactly the price that a lot of the U.S. companies were willing to contract 2020 production at. Navy beans came out at 30, which again was also the same price that companies were contracting at over the past couple winter months. There's a shift in mentality, I feel, from what I've seen with a number of U.S. growers. The reluctance to contract, there's a number of guys I know that are just talking about growing their beans open. Because we have no carryover and nobody has a hot clue what this growing season is actually going to turn out to be, they're willing to run the risk, because even if they don't have a contract, there's still a good chance they're going to get that price at the end of the day when the crop comes off. And we do need pretty much an above average crop in all of our production areas in the US and Canada to get even close to back to where we were 2 years ago with having some inventory on hand. And as we've seen over the last couple of years, the growing season can correct markets or make changes in the markets very quickly. I've never seen the market change as quickly as it did from 2019 2020. I don't think there's maybe a tremendous upside from there, but it's a positive change that will at least sustain dry bean acres. It may not increase them a whole bunch, but it will keep guys planting them. In North Dakota, notoriously, they have been recognized or said by certain individuals to be the brown bag state. Number of growers this year have gone to the production that they were able to get off the field, and they've encountered issues with it. Low germs, low vigor, 50% germinations in some cases, and then they just dumped them into the market. So I think even the brown bag options for the state of North Dakota this year are going to be quite limited. I live in southern Manitoba, so I get to spend, my family's there, so I get to spend a fair bit of time there. But the harvest in Manitoba this year was unique in the way that it showed us the value of growing a slow darkening pinto bean versus a conventional pinto bean. Last year there was 51% vibrant pinto beans, which is a slow darkening pinto grown in Manitoba. I'm expecting this year it will be between 80 and 90%. The windbreaker pinto, which was our #1 variety, it doesn't handle rain, it doesn't handle snow, it discolors. And a lot of the pinto beans that were left in the field in Manitoba, they were sprouted, discolored, and fairly unmarketable. And on top of that, they got enough snow and everything else, guys couldn't actually go out and harvest them anyway. But the vibrant pinto bean, which is architecturally designed for direct harvest, it stood reasonably well. In some cases, the heavy snow actually did knock it to the ground, but where it did stand, it stood through 5 weeks of snow and rain. And I won't say the quality of it was still as good as it was the first 2 weeks of harvest in September, but it was still a very nice, marketable #1 pinto bean. So that's the transition we're seeing in Manitoba, where the bulk of the pinto beans are grown in Canada. I think we're seeing some of that transition in Alberta as well. I think some of the companies there have their own slow darkening varieties that they're pushing for, and it's opening some doors for markets for Canada to ship into Africa and into Europe. They seem to like the slow darkening pinto bean, which isn't necessarily the case in the US. So there's basically 3 companies in the US that market a huge volume of pinto beans. And whenever I talk to those companies, they don't want to hear about slow darkening pinto beans. They don't think they can properly. They don't think that the taste is the same. And because they're the ones that sell most of those beans, they do influence a number of the acres that get planted. And with the conventional varieties, weather is always going to be your biggest enemy. Now, I do think we're going to get back into a year of reasonably normal production. I think the weather outside today is maybe a good indication of that. So, that being said, I always enjoy a little bit of interaction with the audience, so fire at will. In the back?
Yeah, you talked about black beans and you thought maybe that market would be diminished this year. Can you kind of elaborate on that a little more? Like lot of the black bean you said is still left out of the field unharvested, and so is it just the demand increasing, or is there a supply issue there, or what's going on?
We had a lot of carryover going into the 2019 harvest. Michigan is still, I think North Dakota was pretty close this last year to toppling Michigan with black bean production, had they been able to harvest. But Michigan is still the leader in the black bean production region. And there was a lot of carryover. The market has stayed at a very stable 26, 27 US level through all of this adversity that we've seen related to 2019. Is there market potential for 2020 for black beans? There could very well be, because a good friend of mine once, and you know, he ran a fairly large farming operation. They planted about 4,000 acres. And he'd tell me every now and then, he'd say, well, you know, nothing's really pointing me in any direction. So I'll just wait till spring and I'll plant whatever seeds available, and that'll work out for him. And you know, that could be the case this year because of the lack of interest in producing black beans or even cranberry beans. This could be the right year to produce them because the interest is low. That carryover mountain of black beans, some of the experts in the industry tell me that we'll chew through that and use up and export all of our US carryover black beans by October 1, 2020. So we may be in a situation where we are reliant on 2020 production. And that being said, new crop beans are always of more interest than beans that are 1, 2, or 3, or 4 years old. Not that anybody should hang on to beans that long, but some do.
What was acreage at in Manitoba last year, and where do you think it's going to go this year? I've heard some reports about soybean acreage probably going down in Manitoba, so is that make this red meat acreage reflecting red meat acres?
You know, it would be if there was more seed around. I do think we're going to have a bit of an increase from last year. Last year we had 158,000 acres of total dry bean production in Manitoba. This year, my gut feeling is we're going to see, we also had a record number of acres of cranberry beans planted in Manitoba last year. I think there was 8,800 acres. We're going to see a reduction in some specialty beans in Manitoba, kidneys and cranberry beans. We're going to see a bit of a reduction in black beans, which will probably be made up with a substitution of pinto beans. But I think our pinto bean acreage is going to reach an all-time high in Manitoba. If I was to guess today, I would say we might be looking at a 40% increase in pinto bean production in Manitoba. And our acres could be up, you know, maybe 10,000, 15,000 from last year. So we could be in that, you know, 170,000 acres, which isn't all that uncommon for Manitoba. For a number of years, we were planting between 170 and 190,000 acres of dry beans in Manitoba. That kind of all changed in 2010 after they had another one of their wet years. And markets were really depressed. I think they were around 27 Canadian, 26 maybe. They may even have been closer to the 20-cent level, if I recall correctly. And Manitoba took care of that pretty quick because they went from like 165,000 acres to planting only 55,000 acres of dry beans in 2011. Manitoba's a very aggressive area, and people will change very quickly their planting intentions. But I don't think we can overdo our acres because of the limitations of seed. There is some brown bagging going on in Manitoba, and there were some producers who got some product off that did germ well, and they will plant their own seed, but Pintos will be definitely up in Manitoba. Everybody's growing what was good last year. Nobody's ever done that before. Yes,
Can you
Jeff?
give us a quick market, or I guess production contract snapshot of all the different types that you're seeing, kind of an average in Canadian dollars?
In Canadian dollars, contracting options for 2020 over the last couple months have been, Pintos between, most of the Pinto Beans were contracted around 35 cents in Manitoba. And a lot of companies came out with contracts early on the Pintos. There are also some contracts that were done at 37, 38 in Canadian values. Navy beans have been contracting also at 35, which surprises me a little bit because growing navy beans is not like growing Pintos. It's a very stringent market where a lot of different quality characteristics are analyzed by the buyers. Track seed coats, earth tag, they gotta be nice and shiny white, and whereas with the Pintos you can there's such a big market for Pintos, you can have a little bit of earth tag on them, and not a lot of companies do track seed coats on Pinto beans either. Black beans have been offered some contracts by Canadian companies, but they're looking at 30, 31 cent levels. And that's another deterrent for why guys don't want to plant black beans. There are companies in Manitoba that are really struggling to market the black beans they have in inventory. And then there's a lot of companies that are just 20 miles south in North Dakota that are having tremendous success marketing black beans. Cranberry beans, there's some contracting done at 45, which it sounds like a good price. But, when you're looking at $157 an acre for seed, that takes a little luster out of the price. And that is really where a lot of the specialty beans like dark red kidneys, light red kidneys, cranberry beans, the U.S. seed industry didn't have to lower pricing this year because they had a lot of seed. They went up a little bit from last year because of the shortage that actually take advantage of the opportunity to raise the price up even more. So that's, even dark red kidneys, 50-cent contracts in Canadian values. The one unique thing about this year with the kidneys is that there's so much confidence in the ability to market those beans. And in the 17 years I've been involved in dry bean production and marketing, I've never had anybody come out with a full production contract on any class of bean until this year. And this year they actually came out with a full production contract for light red and dark red kidney beans, which at 47-cent light red kidneys and 50-cent dark red kidney beans, if there's a crop, there's definitely some good potential for the growers. And the other thing is that you don't have to worry about marketing. You just grow it, grow the best, the biggest quality crop you can, and deliver it in. I touch on all the beans there. We do a little bit of Great Northern contracting in Manitoba. Hansel Co-op is probably the largest player in Manitoba with respect to the Great Northerns. And I think contract levels there have been between 35 and 40-ish. And We don't do much with small reds anymore in Manitoba. We don't do anything with pink beans in Manitoba. Pink beans used to be a wonderful crop in Manitoba when I was a buyer. It was one of our earliest maturing crops that came off the field before any other bean did. But they stopped serving pink beans in their chili at Wendy's, and the market was gone. So